Before I preach this word, I need you to hear how it ends. You are not breaking, you are becoming. What feels like pressure is producing power. What feels like delay is divine development. God is not against you. He is forming something in you that cannot be rushed. If God wanted to destroy you, he wouldn't be working on you this intensely. If God wanted to abandon you, he wouldn't be touching places you've avoided your entire life. The struggle you're in right now is not punishment. It's precision. You're not struggling because God is distant. You're struggling because God is working deeper. When God goes deeper before he takes you higher, it often feels confusing, uncomfortable, and even unfair because everything in us wants elevation without excavation. We want doors to open, platforms to appear, prayers to be answered quickly, and seasons to shift. But God is far more concerned with what those blessings will rest upon than how fast they arrive. Height without depth is dangerous in the kingdom. God knows that if he lifts something that hasn't been rooted, examined, and strengthened beneath the surface, it will eventually collapse under its own weight. So when God delays the visible breakthrough, it's usually because he is addressing the invisible structure of your life. God knows that elevation without emotional and spiritual healing will only magnify dysfunction. So instead of changing your address, he changes your heart. Instead of shifting your environment, he reshapes your perspective. This is why the work feels personal and intense. God is not mass producing results. He is custom building you. There are seasons where it feels like God is dismantling your life instead of blessing it. Things you once relied on stop working. Relationships shift. Comfort zones collapse. You begin to question yourself, your calling, and even God's timing. But demolition always precedes construction. God cannot build something new on a foundation that is cracked, unstable, or borrowed. So he removes what cannot support where he is taking you. It feels like loss, but it is actually preparation. God is clearing space for something that requires more strength than what you currently have. Going deeper also means God teaches you obedience without explanation. He asks you to trust him when the outcome is unclear. He stretches your faith beyond feelings and trains you to walk by conviction instead of convenience. This is where many people give up because depth requires patience, humility, and surrender. It's easier to chase visible success than to endure invisible transformation. But God values who you are becoming more than what you are achieving. He is not impressed by speed. He is committed to maturity. The deeper work of God often exposes why you want elevation in the first place. Are you seeking validation or are you seeking obedience? Are you chasing purpose or are you trying to fill a void? God loves you too much to promote a version of you that to be fear. These changes may not look impressive to others, but they are monumental in the kingdom. God celebrates depth long before the world celebrates height. He knows that what is built in secret will eventually sustain what is revealed in public. The deeper work of God often feels like resistance because it requires surrender. God is not just adding to your life. He is subtracting from it. He removes dependencies that compete with him. He strips away self-reliance so that trust can grow. This is uncomfortable because it makes you vulnerable. But vulnerability is where real faith is formed. When you can no longer rely on your strength, your strategies, or your timing, you learn to rely on God in a way that changes you permanently. Going deeper also means God aligns your character with your calling. Calling without character leads to compromise. Anointing without integrity leads to collapse. God is not willing to sacrifice your future for your impatience, so he slows you down long enough for your inner life to catch up with your external desires. This is why you may feel like you are behind while others seem to be moving ahead. God is not racing you against people. He is refining you for purpose. Depth creates resilience. When you've been through seasons where God was all you had, you stop being shaken by seasons where things go wrong. You learn that your security is not in outcomes, but in God's presence. This is the kind of faith that lasts. This is the kind of faith God can build upon. He is not interested in temporary success. He is building eternal fruit. The reason God goes deeper before he takes you higher is because higher places reveal everything. Elevatio. And amplifies weaknesses, exposes motives, and tests faith in ways lower levels never could. God prepares you now so you won't be destroyed later. Every unanswered prayer, every closed door, every uncomfortable season is part of a divine strategy to strengthen what cannot be seen so that what will be seen can endure. What feels like delay is actually development. What feels like pressure is actually preparation. God is not working against your timeline. He is working for your future. He is shaping you into someone who can carry the weight of what you've been asking for. And while the process feels slow, nothing is being wasted. Every moment of obedience, every tear cried in faith, every step taken without clarity is building depth that will eventually support height. When conviction enters your life, it often feels uncomfortable because it confronts what you've learned to manage instead of what God intends to transform. Conviction is not God shaming you or pushing you away. It is God drawing closer and insisting on alignment. The reason conviction feels intense is because it is personal. God does not convict what he plans to abandon. He corrects what he intends to use. When your heart becomes sensitive to things you once overlooked, it is not because you are becoming weaker, but because God is sharpening your awareness for a deeper purpose. Conviction shows up when God begins to separate you from what no longer matches where he is taking you. Habits that once felt harmless start to feel heavy. Conversations you used to enjoy begin to drain you. Environments you once tolerated now disturb your spirit. This internal discomfort is not random. It is directional. God is adjusting your spiritual appetite. What satisfied you before can no longer sustain you now. This shift often creates confusion because nothing external has changed, yet everything inside you feels unsettled. That unrest is not instability, it is transition. The deeper the calling, the more precise the conviction becomes. God does not deal with everyone the same way because he is not preparing everyone for the same assignment. When he begins to work seriously in your life, he pays attention to details you once ignored. Your motives matter. Your tone matters. Your private thoughts matter. God begins to address not just what you do, but why you do it. This is where conviction separates surface level faith from surrendered faith. It moves you from religious behavior into relational obedience. Conviction often exposes areas where you have settled for survival instead of transformation. You may have learned how to function with pain, manage insecurity, or cope with fear without ever allowing God to heal it. Conviction disrupts that comfort. It shines light on emotional patterns and spiritual blind spots that limit your growth. God does this not to overwhelm you, but to free you. Healing cannot occur where honesty is absent. Conviction invites you into truth so restoration can begin. When God convicts you, he is inviting you into greater responsibility. Responsibility in the kingdom is not about control, it is about stewardship. God begins to entrust you with more discernment, more authority, and more awareness. That awareness can feel heavy at first because ignorance once felt easier, but clarity always carries weight. Conviction trains you to respond to the Spirit instead of reacting to emotions. It teaches you to pause, reflect, and choose obedience even when it costs you comfort. Conviction also reveals how closely God is walking with you. The more intimate the relationship, the more specific the guidance. In shallow relationships, boundaries are vague. In deep relationships, expectations are clear. God's conviction is evidence that he is personally involved in your formation. He's not watching from a distance. He is shaping you up close. This is why conviction often targets things no one else can see. God deals with the private before he ever addresses the public. Many people confuse conviction with condemnation because both bring awareness of wrongdoing, but their sources and outcomes are completely different. Condemnation pushes you away from God and leaves you feeling hopeless and defeated. Conviction draws you toward God and leads to repentance, growth, and freedom. Conviction always comes with grace. It may confront you, but it also empowers you. God never exposes something without offering the strength to overcome it. As conviction deepens, it begins to realign your desires. You don't just avoid certain behaviors, you lose the appetite for them. What once appealed to your flesh begins to conflict with your spirit. This internal tension is not weakness, it is spiritual maturity forming. God is retraining your desires so that obedience flows from love rather than obligation. You begin to choose holiness not because you fear consequences, but because you value closeness with God. Conviction also teaches you discernment. You start recognizing subtle compromises that once went unnoticed. Small attitudes, quiet resentments, unchecked pride, and hidden jealousy become visible. God addresses these things because they silently sabotage your calling. Large failures often begin with small, unchecked compromises. Conviction interrupts that process early. It protects you from damage you cannot yet see. The weight of conviction increases because the impact of your obedience increases. God knows that your decisions affect more than just you. Your obedience influences others, whether you realize it or not. Conviction trains you to live with awareness of that influence. It shapes you into someone who understands that calling is not just about what you receive, but about what flows through you. God refines you because he intends to use you as a vessel, and vessels must be clean to carry what is holy. Conviction also strips away excuses. When God begins to work deeply in your life, explanations no longer satisfy. You can't blame your past, your environment, or other people for what God is calling you to confront. This is not cruelty, it is empowerment. God is showing you that you are no longer bound by what once limited you. Conviction signals that you are strong enough to face what you once avoided. It reveals growth even when it feels uncomfortable. As conviction increases, your tolerance for spiritual inconsistency decreases. You become more aware of the gap between what you confess and how you live. This awareness can be painful, but it is necessary. Alignment requires honesty. God would rather deal with uncomfortable truth than allow you to live in comfortable deception. Conviction is God refusing to let you settle for a version of faith that lacks power. Conviction also teaches you how to listen. You become or sensitive to the Spirit's promptings, warnings, and guidance. This sensitivity develops through obedience. Each time you respond to conviction, your spiritual hearing becomes clearer. Disobedience dulls sensitivity. Obedience sharpens it. God is training you to recognize his voice, not just in dramatic moments, but in daily decisions. The deeper calling attached to your life requires a deeper inner life. God knows that external success without internal alignment leads to collapse. So he works on you internally before he expands you externally. Conviction is part of that preparation. It strengthens your spiritual core so that you can withstand pressure, criticism, and opposition without losing your integrity. God is protecting you from future failure by addressing present issues. Conviction often isolates you because obedience sometimes separates you from people who don't understand your process. This isolation is not punishment, it is focus. God reduces distractions so he can shape you clearly. When fewer voices influence you, his voice becomes louder. This is where clarity is born. Conviction narrows your path so your steps can be intentional. Conviction also deepens your dependence on grace. You become more aware of your need for God's help, not less. Maturity does not eliminate weakness, it acknowledges it honestly. Conviction teaches you to rely on God's strength rather than pretending you don't need it. This humility becomes a foundation for lasting faith. As conviction continues to work, it reshapes your identity. You stop seeing obedience as restriction and begin seeing it as protection. You understand that God's boundaries are not meant to limit you, but to preserve you. Conviction reveals that God's commands flow from love, not control. This revelation changes how you relate to God. Obedience becomes relational rather than transactional. The reason conviction feels heavier is because God is taking you seriously. He is not calling you to shallow faith or surface level commitment. He is inviting you into a deeper walk that requires integrity, surrender, and trust. Conviction is evidence that God sees potential in you that you may not yet see in yourself. He corrects what he values. He refines what he plans to use. And every moment of conviction is an invitation to grow into the calling he has placed on your life. When it is said that God often wounds what he intends to heal, it challenges the way we naturally understand love, care, and kindness. We are conditioned to believe that love avoids pain at all costs, but divine love is more committed to wholeness than to comfort. God sees beneath the surface of your life. He sees not only what hurts, but what is infected, what is fractured, and what is slowly killing you beneath your ability to cope. What feels like a wound from God is often the beginning of restoration, because healing that never touches the source is not healing at all. It is temporary relief. God is not interested in numbing pain if that pain is pointing to something that must be addressed. Many of the wounds God touches are not fresh injuries, but old ones you learned to live with. You adapted to them. You built habits around them. You structured your personality, your relationships, and your decisions around unresolved pain. Over time, you stopped calling it pain and started calling it normal. God disrupts it at false peace. When he presses on those places, it can feel cruel because you thought you had already survived them. But survival is not the same as healing. God does not want you merely functioning. He wants you free. When God wounds, he does not do so to harm, but to expose. Infection thrives in darkness. Pain that is hidden never gets healed. It only spreads. God brings wounds to the surface because light is where cleansing happens. What feels like reopening an old scar is often God removing what was never properly dealt with. This process is uncomfortable because it requires honesty. You can no longer deny what hurt you. You can no longer minimize what shaped you. God invites you to name the pain so it can lose its power. The reason this process feels intense is because God is not treating symptoms, he is treating roots. Symptoms are easier to manage. Roots must be pulled. Pulling roots disturbs the soil of your life. It shakes things you thought were stable. It reveals how deeply certain experiences affected you. God is not surprised by what comes up. He already knew it was there. What surprises you is how much it still mattered. Healing often hurts because it confronts what pain taught you to believe. God wounds what he intends to heal because some wounds are self-protective structures that no longer serve you. Pain taught you how to guard yourself, how to shut down, how to control, how to withdraw, how to avoid vulnerability. Those strategies may have kept you safe once, but they are now limiting your growth. God touches those defenses not to expose you to harm, but to free you from fear. What once protected you is now imprisoning you, and God refuses to let fear define your future. This kind of divine wounding often comes through circumstances, conversations, delays, and disappointments. God allows situations that touch sensitive places in your heart. He permits moments that feel unfair, confusing, or deeply personal. These moments are not random. They reveal where healing is still needed. God uses pressure to bring buried pain to the surface because pressure exposes what has been hidden. When life squeezes you, what comes out shows God where to work. Healing requires surrender, and surrender is painful to a wounded heart. Letting go of control feels dangerous when control once kept you safe. Trusting again feels risky when trust once betrayed you. God understands this tension. He does not rush the process, but he does insist on it. He knows that unhealed pain will sabotage everything he tries to build in your life. So he patiently but firmly invites you to lay down the armor you no longer need. When God wounds, he also redefines strength. Strength is no longer pretending you're fine. Strength becomes honesty. Strength becomes dependence. Strength becomes allowing God into places you never allowed anyone else. This shift feels humiliating at first because vulnerability exposes weakness, but God's power is released where weakness is acknowledged. Healing begins when you stop performing strength and start receiving grace. God often wounds what he intends to heal because pain has a voice, and that voice has been shaping your decisions. Unhealed pain speaks through fear, anger, avoidance, control, and self-sabotage. God quiets that voice by addressing the pain itself. He does not silence it by force. He heals it through trust, and love. But truth can sting before it soothes. Love can confront before it comforts. God's approach is not gentle avoidance, but faithful presence. The wounding process also strips away false identities formed through pain. Pain may have taught you that you are unworthy, unwanted, unsafe, or alone. These beliefs become internalized truths that shape how you see yourself and God. When God touches those wounds, those lies surface. It hurts to realize how long you believed something that was never true. But exposure is necessary for replacement. God removes lies so he can plant truth. Sometimes God wounds by removing what you depended on. Relationships shift, roles change, opportunities close. These losses reopen emotional wounds, but they also reveal misplaced trust. God is not punishing you, he is reordering your heart. Anything you depend on more than him will eventually wound you deeper. God allows temporary pain to prevent permanent damage. He is protecting your future, even when it feels like he is disrupting your present. Healing also requires patience, and impatience makes wounds worse. God does not rush healing because rushed healing produces fragile results. He works layer by layer, memory by memory, belief by belief. This slowness can feel frustrating, especially when you want relief. But God values thoroughness over speed. He heals in a way that lasts. Temporary relief may feel good, but lasting freedom requires time. God wounds what he intends to heal because he is committed to truth over illusion. Illusion feels peaceful until it collapses. Truth may hurt, but it restores. God chooses truth every time. He would rather you cry in honesty than smile and then, ow. He would rather you wrestle with him than walk away pretending nothing is wrong. Healing begins in real places, not imagined ones. This process also teaches you compassion. When you become aware of your own wounds, you become gentler with others. You stop expecting perfection from broken people. You stop demanding what they cannot give. God uses your healing to reshape how you love. Wounded healers carry a depth of empathy that untouched people often lack. God does not waste pain. He transforms it into understanding. As God works on wounds, he also rebuilds trust. Trust is not restored by ignoring pain, but by addressing it honestly. God proves his faithfulness by staying present in the process. He does not abandon you when emotions surface. He does not reject you when anger rises. He remains steady while you heal. This consistency slowly rewires how you relate to him. You learn that God is safe, even when the process is uncomfortable. Healing also changes how you interpret pain. Pain no longer means abandonment. It becomes information. It shows you where growth is happening. It reveals where God is working. You begin to see pain as a signal rather than a sentence. This perspective shift does not remove pain, but it removes despair. You understand that discomfort has purpose, and purpose gives pain meaning. God wounds what he intends to heal because he is restoring you for relationship, not just relief. He wants intimacy, not just improvement. Healing draws you closer to God because it requires dependence. Dependence deepens connection. Connection transforms identity. God is not fixing you from a distance. He is walking with you through the process. The wounds OD touches are often the ones that shaped your faith. Disappointments with people may have affected how you trust God. Betrayals may have influenced how you pray. Loss may have shaped how you hope. God heals these wounds because they distort your view of him. He wants you to know him as he truly is, not as pain portrayed him to be. As healing progresses, you begin to respond differently to familiar triggers. Situations that once overwhelmed you lose their power. Emotions that once controlled you become manageable. This change feels subtle at first, but it is significant. It is evidence that healing is taking root. God is restoring your ability to live without constant reaction. The wounding process is also where faith deepens. Faith that has never been tested is shallow. Healing tests faith because it requires trusting God with pain instead of avoiding it. This trust strengthens your spiritual foundation. You learn that God can be trusted not only with blessings, but with brokenness. God often wounds what he intends to heal because he sees the whole story, not just the chapter you are in. He knows where this process leads. He knows what kind of freedom is on the other side. He knows the version of you that emerges after healing is stronger, wiser, and more aligned with his purpose. What feels like harm is actually preparation. Healing does not erase scars, but it changes their meaning. Scars become evidence of survival and restoration rather than reminders of defeat. God does not hide your scars, he redeems them. They become testimonies of his faithfulness. But scars only form after wounds have healed, and healing requires touching what hurts. The pain of healing is temporary, but the freedom it produces is lasting. God is patient enough to walk you through the discomfort because he loves you enough to want you whole. He is not satisfied with surface level peace. He wants deep restoration. That depth requires honesty, courage, and surrender. And while the process may feel like wounding, it is guided by love, sustained by grace, and directed toward freedom. When it is said that the struggle is proof you are still in God's hands, it reframes pain in a way that challenges our natural instincts. We often assume that struggle means failure, abandonment, or punishment, but in the spiritual life, struggle is frequently evidence of involvement, not neglect. God does not wrestle with what he plans to discard. He shapes what he intends to keep. The very fact that you are experiencing tension, resistance, and pressure is a sign that something is still being formed. God is not finished with you, and unfinished things are often uncomfortable. Struggle exists where growth is happening. Nothing that is growing remains static. Growth stretches, resists, and disrupts comfort. When God places his hand on your life, he begins to press, mold, and refine. This pressure feels like opposition because it challenges old patterns, familiar identities, and comfortable rhythms. But pressure in God's hands is purposeful. It is not random force. It is intentional shaping. The struggle is not designed to crush you, but to contour you into what you are becoming. If God had withdrawn his hand, you would feel nothing. Dead things do not resist. Uninvolved hands do not produce friction. Struggle implies engagement. It means God is still working in your life, still erecting, still guiding, still adjusting. Comfort without God can feel peaceful, but lead nowhere. Struggle with God leads somewhere meaningful. It is the friction between who you are and who you are called to be. That tension proves that transformation is still underway. Many people mistake struggle for spiritual failure because they believe faith should eliminate difficulty. But faith does not remove struggle, it redefines it. Struggle becomes the environment where trust is exercised and obedience is tested. God often allows struggle because it exposes what you rely on when things are not easy. In struggle, illusions fall away. You discover whether your faith is rooted in convenience or conviction. God uses this clarity to strengthen what is genuine and confront what is superficial. Struggle also keeps you dependent. Dependence is not weakness in the kingdom, it is alignment. When life is easy, it is tempting to rely on self, strategies, and resources. Struggle strips away those crutches and reveals your need for God. This revelation is not meant to shame you, but to anchor you. God wants your confidence to be rooted in him rather than in circumstances. Struggle teaches you how to lean, listen, and wait. The presence of struggle often means that God is protecting you from something worse. Unchecked comfort can lead to complacency, pride, and spiritual drift. Struggle interrupts that drift. It keeps you aware, prayerful, and attentive. God uses difficulty to recalibrate your heart. When struggle enters, it often signals that something must change. God is redirecting you, refining your motives, or correcting your path. This correction is a form of care. Struggle also reveals your spiritual resilience. You begin to see how far you have come by noticing how differently you respond to pressure. What once broke you now bends you. What once overwhelmed you now pushes you toward prayer instead of panic. These changes may feel subtle, but they are significant. They show that God's work in you is producing strength, even if you do not feel strong. Struggle becomes a measuring stick for growth. In God's hands, struggle has boundaries. It may be intense, but it is not endless. God knows how much pressure you can handle and when to ease it. He does not test to destroy, he tests to reveal. The struggle you are facing is not beyond God's control. It is permitted, measured, and purposeful. Knowing this does not remove the pain, but it adds meaning. Meaning gives endurance a reason. Struggle also exposes areas where you still need healing or surrender. When certain situations trigger strong reactions, God highlights what still needs attention. Struggle brings unresolved issues to the surface. This exposure is not condemnation, it is invitation. God is showing you where he wants to work next. The discomfort is a signal, not a verdict. It points to growth that is still unfolding. The struggle you experience often aligns with the size of your calling. Greater assignments require deeper formation. God prepares you for responsibility by strengthening your spiritual core. This preparation often looks like resistance because strength is built against resistance. Muscles do not grow without tension. Faith does not deepen without challenge. God is developing capacity in you so you can carry what is ahead without collapsing under its weight. Struggle also guards you against pride. When success comes too easily, it is tempting to forget God. Struggle keeps you grounded. It reminds you that every victory, every breakthrough, and every step forward is sustained by grace. This humility preserves your character. God is more concerned with who you are becoming than how quickly you advance. Struggle slows you down long enough for your character to catch up with your gifts. In struggle, your relationship with God becomes more honest. You stop performing faith and start expressing it. You bring your doubts, fears, and questions to God instead of hiding them. This honesty deepens intimacy. God is not offended by your wrestling. He invites it. Struggle creates space for real conversation, not rehearsed prayers. God meets you in authenticity, not pretense. Struggle also teaches discernment. You learn to distinguish between God's voice and other voices. Pressure clarifies priorities. You become more aware of what matters and what does not. Struggle strips away distractions and exposes what is essential. This clarity shapes your decisions long after the struggle passes. God uses difficulty to sharpen your spiritual perception. The presence of struggle also confirms that you are not stagnant. Stagnation is comfortable but unproductive. Movement creates resistance. When you step forward in obedience, opposition often increases. This opposition is not a sign that you are on the wrong path. It is often confirmation that you are moving. God does not promise an easy road, but he promises his presence along the way. That presence is proven in struggle. Struggle reminds you that God's grace is sufficient. You experience grace not as a concept, but as a sustaining force. Grace becomes tangible when you survive what you thought would destroy you. Each day you endure is evidence of God's sustaining power. You may not feel victorious, but survival itself is a testimony of grace at work. God's hands are steady even when the process feels shaky. Your emotions may fluctuate, your understanding may be limited, and your strength may feel small, but God's grip does not weaken. He does not release you mid-process. The struggle you are in is not evidence of abandonment, but of ongoing care. God remains committed to finishing what he started. Struggle also shapes your testimony. The lessons learned in difficulty cannot be taught in comfort. Your future encouragement to others will be rooted in what you endured. God often uses your struggle to prepare you to support someone else later. Pain becomes purpose when it is redeemed. God wastes nothing, not even your hardest seasons. As struggle continues, you learn patience. Patience is not passive waiting, it is active trust. You learn to trust God's timing when you cannot control outcomes. This trust strengthens your faith. You become anchored rather than anxious. Patience grows where struggle persists, and patience produces maturity. The struggle also reorients your hope. You stop placing hope in immediate results and begin anchoring it in God's character. This shift is crucial. Circumstances change, but God remains faithful. Struggle teaches you to hope beyond what you can see. This hope sustains you when answers are delayed. Struggle is also where obedience becomes costly. Obeying God in comfort is easy. Obeying him in struggle reveals commitment. God honors this obedience. Each faithful choice made under pressure builds spiritual weight. God trusts those who remain faithful when it costs them something. The struggle proves you are still in God's hands because he is still shaping, still refining, still guiding. He does not let you drift aimlessly. He applies pressure where necessary and releases it when the purpose is fulfilled. Even when you do not understand the process, his hands remain sure. When the struggle eventually eases, you will recognize how deeply God was involved. You will see patterns, protection, and preparation you could not see in the moment. The struggle will make sense in hindsight, not because it was easy, but because it was purposeful. God's hands never left you. They were forming you the entire time. Don't run from the struggle. Don't numb the process. Don't quit in the middle of God doing the deepest work of your life. Because when God finishes working deep, he releases you strong. He sends you stable and he positions you ready. You're not struggling because God left. You're struggling because God stayed and he's not done yet.